All right, I'm going to talk a little bit about education, and actually we'll be building on some of these ideas about information. First to say, my work is really focused less so on thinking about the science of behavioral change, but trying to encourage certain behaviors. In particular, I'm looking at the transition from high school into college. So a number of the challenges we see here, it's not a matter of, I know I should be exercising, I know I should be doing these things, but you're dealing with very, very long-term investments. Rewards are delayed, as with other kinds of behavioral changes that we've been talking about. But also very important is the complex information and processes. So if you think a bit about education, two of the behaviors we oftentimes focus on in terms of trying to affect, one is academic. We want students to study, take rigorous courses, and so forth. The second is financial. You need, hopefully, to prepare financially by savings, doing other things like that, completing forms, and so on. And I've worked on these first two issues, but after a while, kind of came to the realization that even if you can fix and kind of motivate people to work on the academic preparation side and to realize that they have to think about this affordability side of it, that information is a really significant barrier to both of those. If you think for a moment, in terms of academics, there's all these little choices that you have to make about which courses you should take. Parents ask me this all the time. Should you retake the SAT? How do I avoid remediation? Should I save? Is that going to affect my financial aid? All these other kinds of things. And so this is definitely an area where we have too little information. Oftentimes there's all kinds of surveys that families don't understand that there's something called the FAFSA. They have bad, incorrect information. They always tend to overinflate how much college actually costs. They get late information. They oftentimes don't find out about financial aid until spring of their senior year of high school. So that's not a lot of time before they actually go. Very much so recently, overwhelming information. I think we're all kind of in this world where we've just got tons of things coming at us, but you know, the United States is a wonderful place to go to school, but you've got 6,000 different schools to choose from that vary in all these kinds of crazy ways, that charge all these very different prices and so forth, unclear processes, cumbersome applications. So talk about two quick studies, and I'm actually going to be building on very inadvertently something that Todd said earlier about rip currents, and we call them rip tides. But this just gives you a sense of the FAFSA, what it used to look like a few years ago, multiple pages and pages and pages that you had to complete. And so one project I did with several co-authors, we were working with H&R Block, and we used tax data while families were in the offices to pre-populate their federal financial aid form. Then we gave them an individualized estimate, and we submitted it electronically. And for those of you who've done the FAFSA recently, we did all of this, including consent process, an average about 8 minutes. So an 8-minute intervention had a 26% increase in college going for the high school seniors. So we all knew that these forms were barriers, but we didn't have a sense of just how large these barriers were. So it's kind of this going into the behavioral economics part of it. How could something so small have such a huge effect? But this question of, well, then do we persist? And so Wendy, your question about we can change early behaviors, but what happens? Turns out as we've continued to track them, they've been staying in college and persisting at very high rates. And so there's something about the fact that this process we were making them go through with the FAFSA is completely orthogonal to the skills you need to actually do well in college. That the process is completely separate from the longer term kinds of behaviors that we want them to do. More recently, and these results are coming within the last month, had an ongoing project with students in the Boston Public Schools focusing on the parents of kids in grades 7 to 10, taking another really complicated process looking at college savings. And we randomized them into 3 groups. The control group just got some general information about how to prepare for college both academically and financially. Second group, we helped them fill up a 529 application, which if you've seen one is like 5-point font, pages after page, lots of scary language. And then the second treatment group, we filled out the form plus gave them the $50 deposit to get started. These were the take-up rates. Information alone was not enough, but giving them the $50 to get started. About a quarter signed up. We've continued to track them. What we found out is after having an account, they did a lot more to prepare. A third of them set up automatic monthly contributions, and this was with us not ever talking to them again. So once they were in the process, they started to engage. And they saved on average about $1,200 more over the course of 3 to 4 years. So summarizing some of this, you know, all this complexity, what that does, the fact that these interventions can be highly effective, but these are two examples of what Todd was talking about before, of getting them into these riptides, that certain behaviors you get stuck, and then once you get them over the hurdle, it just seems to pull them out. I'm going to leave you, though, with some questions that I've been thinking about going forward. So David mentioned being in an administrative position. I am coming off of 4 years of being academic dean, and it's been very interesting, but one really good piece of advice I got from someone was to treat it like a research project. So in some ways, you can think about the last 4 years as preparing for me to think about this question about how do you make faculty change. So getting inside the classroom, there's so much of the work has been on the outside. How do we think about financial aid? How do we think about counselors and so forth? But what happens inside the classroom? And you can think about lots of different changes that as faculty we might be able to make. How we teach, is it chalk and talk? Is it engaging? What we teach, do we update our syllabi? Do we make the course content more relevant? Do we make more resources available for students? Are we making little videos so that if they got confused when we were teaching elasticity, they can just go see the video? But even some of the other kinds of things with, say, mindset, growth mindset, are you sending messages to students? So there was one example, a couple of friends did a small trial at Sacramento State where after the midterm, the professors, it was the automated process, professors sent emails to students afterwards saying, for students who did this well, most of these students succeeded in the class and they passed and they did great, or here are additional resources, please come see me, I really want to help you, I think you can do a good job, and got these huge results in terms of course completion and course performance. So I think there's a lot of avenues here, though, and maybe you guys can help me think about this as we think about ourselves, what makes us change. But first, I'm dealing with a lot of, or I want to focus a lot on broad access institutions where the teaching loads can be 6 to 8 courses a year with little TA or TF support, very different incentives. And certainly, as we've seen in other parts of the education literature, when we try to bring kind of traditional models to K through 12 teachers, that didn't work very well. And as faculty, we have very different kinds of incentives or preferences. Unclear about what would actually improve student outcomes. There's a wide open and need for research and education, so it's not like I can promise you if you do this in the classroom, it's absolutely going to improve your outcomes. And then how to replicate or scale. So I've had several systems who said, yes, we want you to do these kinds of experiments, but if the chancellor says, shh, great, that doesn't mean the faculty are going to do anything. And then how do you make this sustainable, which is the classic Gates Foundation problem of they can pay institutions to change their behavior, but what happens when they take the money away?